Right, so this is the path leading up to the hamlet of Crafton, where I spent many of my teenage years. Look at these young calves. It's a theme. It is what stamps sort of that this is an English production. Yes, so sorry, my great-grandfather ended up becoming a Protestant pastor and settling in England. I was the first to return to the one true faith after quite an interval, actually, in my family history.
And that happened by quite a roundabout route as well, didn't it?
Well, yes. So one of the reasons why I think I'm going to let Pico off the lead. Actually, one of the reasons why I've brought you out here to the middle of the Aylesbury Vale is that this spot was actually very important in my own conversion. Having really given up on religion altogether, I started to attend an art school, study the arts. I was always interested in culture and religious themes within culture, but there was a great superficiality there. But I kept on thinking and asking questions. And I used to come to this spot up on the hill, and I used to ask those questions. I would sit there and ponder. And sometimes, looking across the Aylesbury Vale, I would sometimes in frustration stand up and I would cry out, God, do you exist? And if you do, who are you? And eventually there was a response. In the end, at the age of 19, I decided to go over to first in the Himalayas in Nepal, and I went up onto the Nepalese and Tibetan border, and I took my Bible with me, and I managed to read it from chapter 1 of Genesis to the end of the book of the Apocalypse twice while I was there. Although, of course, I found out later that 7 books were missing. So that did
an abridged version of the Bible.
It did save a bit of time. Eventually, I ended up living with a community of French monks, missionary, consecrated religious, in Tamil Nadu, and they, during the time I lived with them, really formed me in the Catholic faith, and actually not only in the Catholic faith, but they carried out a very necessary pre-evangelization as well, because they took me through classical metaphysics and epistemology, and then moved into theology and scripture study. And I was eventually received into the Catholic Church with the permission of the Bishop of Pondicherry there on the coast of South India. And then came back and met you.
I doubt you imagined that you'd go to India and come back Catholic.
Well, that's certainly true. Sorry, Pico. Sorry, are you all right? I stood on his foot, poor thing. Oh, sorry, the hay fever's getting the better of me. Do you want to cut out the giant sneeze and the stamping on my dog? Right? Okay.
I want more of that.
Yes, I think I will, actually. Yeah, thanks. Oh,
Lovely.
yeah.
Get that? Did you get that? Yeah,
This
nice
is-
and sniffly.
This is what they now call the Michael Gove. Oh, excellent. Thank you for that.
And then you came back to England and you kind of put yourself at the service of the church pretty quickly, didn't you?
Well, yes, I mean, part of the problem, that's a very kind way of putting it, but essentially, I wanted to make Catholic friends. I had no Catholic friends, no Catholic family, and the experience of trying to embark on a sacramental life in the Catholic Church was proving to be a very lonely experience. And so one would generally say it was a pretty comprehensive formation for reception into the church. But of course, I didn't know that, because I just thought
You
this
saw
was
that was happening in every parish.
right. I thought it was
in,
your sort of standard formation for reception. So, and I was actually slightly worried. I remember getting on the aeroplane in Bangalore and sitting there, opening my little pocket Catholic Bible now with the
Deuterocanonical book put back in.
the 7 books with which I was unfamiliar, and I remember sitting back and looking out the window and thinking, that was amazing. I've learned so much in the past 4 months. I probably almost know as much as your average Catholic now, and so it came as a surprise to me to discover the sad situation that really a serious formation in the church seemed to be almost completely lacking. Very few people seemed to know the content of true religion, and so I became almost immediately very concerned with questions of formation and actually, you could say evangelization. I realised that there was not an evangelization of the already baptized.
Yeah.
So you have the Aylesbury Vale here, which means so much to me. This is where I suppose I first started to think about understanding creation as a portrait of God. Which is, of course, very much how Aquinas wants us to think about creation. He says that everything that God has created is like a word that speaks about his own goodness, conveys his own inner life. And then you have along here is the Ridgeway. And the Ridgeway is believed to be probably the oldest footpath in Great Britain. Since I think 5000 BC.
Wow.
Yeah, by the tribes and things. But it was taken up very much by the Benedictine monks when they were evangelizing these isles. They would go up and down the Ridgeway. You could survey the whole area from up there. So I think we've seen a really interesting case of this with a mutual friend of ours, a priest in South London, who he is offering catechesis for the families, but it's supplementary catechesis. He's empowering the parents to catechize their own children. He's giving them something to think about, to take home with them. He's offering some thoughts to the children themselves, so they have something to ask about around the dining table at home, for example. But his role, as he understands it, is primarily to offer really, really good liturgy.
Yeah.
And that is what the priest must do. The priest must offer the sacrifice of the new covenant and do it in the most beautiful, most reverent way possible. That is what he must do first and foremost. The parents, the laity, run the club attached to the parish where you go after Holy Mass and you have pints being pulled and cups of tea being served, and there's an amazing community feel there. But the laity have all of these roles to keep the life of the parish going. They know that they can be now the primary catechists of their children, and the priest has done something very, very simple. He hasn't tried to create elaborate programs, he hasn't tried to get all of these activities going. He's said, I will offer a beautiful, beautiful liturgy. The fruit of that has been a flourishing parish.
Hey, and that really shows that distinct role that the laity and the clergy have, which is something which kind of gets confused sometimes. in the end, the role of the priest is to sanctify his people,
Yes.
to pray
To
for them.
sanctify the church.
Yeah, to sanctify
Yes.
the church, and really beginning a day like the one that you described, with a very reverently celebrated, very beautifully, it was a real feast for the ears to listen to, some very beautiful music, feast for the eyes to see, beautiful vestments used, and all of that. It's sanctified, and then obviously on top of that comes what it's all really about, which is the grace which comes to us in the sacrament itself, and that starts everything off, and then all of the rest of it is just to empower the laity to do their job, which is,
Well, it's to go out into the world and bring what you might call the temporal sphere, the secular sphere, the world outside the church, bring it under the reign of Christ, beginning with the family.
yeah,
Sanctifying the family so that the family home becomes the domestic church.
yeah,
And this is become, I think, really quite lost in the contemporary Catholic culture. So many lay people have been led to believe that they will live their vocation as lay people fully when they have some kind of lay ministry role in the church. If they are catechists or extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion, or they're picking the hymns, or they're carrying the cruets up, as long as they're doing something, then they are really living the lay life to the full. And insofar as any of that is good, it is good as an extraordinary role
Yeah.
of the laity. It is not the ordinary role of the laity. And what you find in a priest who says, well, no, actually, the liturgy is my domain, and I want to make it as beautiful as possible, and I want to offer it as worthily as possible, not so much for you and not so much for me, but because I need to make it, insofar as it can be, worthy of God. A priest who does that, who in a certain way puts a border around that which belongs to him as a priest, does not actually banish the laity from doing something in the church or anything like that. But what he's actually doing is he is indicating to the lay faithful that they have a mission of their own. They have an apostolate which belongs to them, and he wishes not to encroach on that, just as he wishes the lay order of the church not to encroach on the liturgical. And that's actually a good thing. That's the opposite of clericalism, actually. That is recognizing that the laity have an apostolate in the life of the church which does not belong to him.
yeah, and which he just doesn't have the time, the resources to do these things, and great thing is he also doesn't have that job.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong to him, and in fact, to empower the laity means to give them a beautiful liturgy, give them the grace that comes from the sacraments, and then really give them the knowledge that they need to be able to evangelize, to be able to catechize their own families, those who come into their orbit, whether it's at school or whether it's in their work. Give them the tools to carry out their own mission. And I think that is really where we have failed very, very strongly.
Well, if there's one thing that I think needs to be conveyed to the laity today, it's that they have a mission of their own. They have an apostolate which belongs to them, which is not getting on the catechetical team. It's not being a minister of Holy Communion. It's not any of that. They have an apostolate which belongs specifically to them, and that apostolate is to bring the world under the reign of Christ the King. That is, no words can convey what a noble apostolate that is. You don't need to be a mini cleric. Your role is to bring the world under the reign of Jesus Christ. And if there's one message that could be conveyed to the priestly hierarchy, it is that you can serve the church, you can serve the lay faithful in their role, actually, by doing one thing above all others, which is to celebrate a beautiful liturgy, to celebrate the sacrifice of the new covenant in the most beautiful way possible. Sort of collapse in a heap and we get very fed up, but eventually an answer came, but it didn't come in the way that I expected.
What kind of age was that?
I suppose I was sort of 17, 16 or 17, and so
I mean, that's a fairly unusual kind of place to be at that age. What would you say kind of led you to those kinds of questions?
well, I'm not sure. I think that if you really sit down, one of the difficulties of modernity is that it's very good at supplying an awful lot of distractions. But if you really get a teenager sitting down and having a conversation, you often find that these questions are at the back. Everyone's wondering, and I had the benefit of being surrounded by so much natural beauty, or at least cultivated natural beauty, and it's very difficult to be in such an environment and not to wonder at it, and for that wondering not to give rise to certain questions, and those questions have to, in the end, give rise to religious questions. That's where all questions lead in the end.
And it's interesting what you say about how the world in which we live supplies so many distractions, which actually stops people from asking those kind of fundamental questions. I always remember a quote from the founder of Communion and Liberation, Don Luigi Giussani, and he has this very kind of florid, quite complex Italianate style of writing, and he writes in one of his books, I think it's The Religious Sense, where he says that there's nothing so empty as the answer to a question that's never been asked. And so I think, to give the opportunity to be able to ask those questions is one of the most precious things that we can give to our children and to the young people in particular, and to anyone really who we encounter in our work or in our kind of mission as Christians.